World of RPGs, Episode 1, Bulgaria. Welcome to the World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe to visit the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host, Mo Bartz, and in Episode 1 we're going to visit Southeastern Europe. Bulgaria lies in the Eastern Balkans and borders the Black Sea. The population is about 6.5 million, mostly Orthodox Christian, and the main language spoken there is Bulgarian, a South Slavonic language written in the Cyrillic alphabet. Bulgarian looks and even sounds a bit like Russian, but that's like saying Swedish is a bit like English. I've had the chance to visit Bulgaria a couple of times, which is why I'm excited to start with this country. At the end of episode 0, we listened to an actual play in Bulgarian. So let's start with the person who runs that channel.
Hello to everyone who's listening to this podcast. My name is Andrei Androv. I'm a Bulgarian who lives in Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. As a student, I've been traveling to a couple of different countries, and I had the opportunity to see some of the role-playing game scenes in those countries. And now I'm trying to add a little bit of that to my own city and country's gaming scene. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, also, I'm a co-founder of Studio Junak, which mainly focuses on making podcasts for RPG series. So it's also my job to play RPG games. I started with D&D 3.5. That's pretty much of a classic here in Bulgaria. Then in the United Kingdom, I switched to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And also in the United Kingdom, I started playing Vampire the Requiem and Vampire the Masquerade. And recently, as I came back to Bulgaria, I've also played some of the one-pager adventures called such as Honey Heist, Lasers and Feelings. I've really wanted to try the Cyberpunk games, but we sadly haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. So I think if we put it on a chronological map, I think the gaming scene in Bulgaria is trying to catch up to the Western world. And of course, there are a couple of years back in development just because the people who participate in this hobby need to just experience things with their own pace, right? In the UK, the gaming clubs are much more popular. You can go to a very small town in the UK and you will have a board game shop where people will regularly be playing board games. In Bulgaria, in the big cities, you have 1, 2, or maybe 3 board game shops where you can also play Dungeons & Dragons or Magic the Gathering. But these hobby shops are still growing, and people learning to go to these shops and to have this as a regular thing are still getting into this type of way of thinking, right? So I would say we're not on the first level of developing this as this in Bulgaria, but maybe we're second or third. It's not as common as in the UK. And in board gaming shops in the UK, I've seen a lot more just people with alternative lifestyles in board gaming shops in the Western world than here in Bulgaria. Here, it's a little bit more of it's a man's hobby in a way type of thinking. But I think slowly but surely we're also getting to embrace other type of hobbyists as well.
So it was difficult to get RPGs in Bulgaria, which led to some very creative solutions.
My name is Eftim. I'm born, raised, and lived in Sofia, Bulgaria for the vast majority of my life. And since the vast majority of my life, I've loved all kinds of games. And I actually really recently got into role-playing games such as D&D. Before that, I just stuck to computer games and, well, all manner of computer games and just board games. Well, that is kind of not true in my childhood, but because, I mean, growing up in Sofia, it was kind of difficult to actually get your hands on D&D books and manuals and any sort of information on that. So we kind of just did our own version of what we saw on TV that D&D was. So technically, I did play a bit of D&D way before, but not really. It doesn't really count. So the first one that comes to mind is the biggest nerd club that we had in Sofia, not so much in size, but just in magnitude and value and what it meant to everybody in Sofia. There was one called Level Up, which started off with board games and card games like Magic the Gathering and then Warhammer Wars and stuff like that. Then it kind of, as more nerdy stuff started coming in, that started growing as well and expanding. And, it was open to anything Nerd Geek or Board Game or just any of that caliber stuff. It was all in there. And once that started becoming more successful, like especially recently, a number of clubs have popped up all around Sofia. Most of them are for board games strictly, but the line is usually blurred, and you can occasionally go to a board game club supposedly and then see people just playing some sort of role-playing game.
When I researched this episode, I had assumed that Bulgaria has almost no gaming scene. During my visits, I had never been to a game shop. Luckily, this time I was able to talk with the owner of one of Sofia's game stores.
Hello, I'm Stefan. Me and my girlfriend are the owners of Drugi Zamak, or The Other Castle, which is a store in Sofia, Bulgaria. We are mainly focused on more serious games and tournament play and role-playing games because there were enough board game cafes, board game bars around. So we just decided to do this place like we wanted it. We have random playstations. We have some campaigns that are the players just gathering here to play. And we have those RPG days when we try to coordinate game masters and players to find each other, because the most frequent thing that happened before that was that a player would come to the store and ask if, do you know somebody who plays X, the game X, mostly Dungeons and Dragons, but different games? And we say yes, but we don't know if they have place in the group. So it's better to write in the group in Facebook or Discord, and nobody did that. So we decided to do those events when we are coordinating game masters with players, and they may do one-shots, they may continue with campaigns, and etc. In book form, we have support for mainly Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition, although my collection is here and we have 3.5 also, and we have books for Vampire, for Exalted, for some of the more indie stuff like Fate, and newer stuff like Monster of the Weekend, etc. But the biggest part of the collection, because that's wanted by the players, is Dungeons and Dragons. I think the scene in Bulgaria in the 80s, it was very hard because, up to 89, we had closed borders and stuff like that. But in the 90s, I think several opportunities were missed to have a quality gaming magazine, gaming, if not industry, at least some sort of nexus of people. I had this thing with the game books, which were very, very popular in Bulgaria. I think only in Hungary and UK and USA there were such a phenomenon as in Bulgaria. But that was a time when not everyone had a personal computer and not everyone spoke English. So it was a perfect time for things like that to grow on. I know people of my age and people 30 somethings that they do not read other books and they do not play other games, but have very swift memories of the game books through the 90s. Most of the people who are over, 25, 30, actually think that there's something that came before the role-playing games here in Bulgaria. I got that feeling because, in the history of games, the choose your own adventures games started as single-player scenarios for role-playing games. Here in Bulgaria, everyone knew about the game books before they knew about RPGs, that they even existed and that thing existent in the world. And in one of the old magazines that was around the game books, it was Game Book Magazine and Game Book and Fantasy, I guess. There was this article about role-playing games, which now from my current viewpoint was kind of criminal because it said that there is this thing, role-playing games, but kind of not for us. I guess we in Bulgaria cannot understand them exactly. So that was the popularization of RPGs in the 90s, and it ended there. And then in the 97, I think there was a crisis in Bulgaria. So the publishers did not react very good to that crisis. They started printing more and more. That led to less quality. So we have this tradition, which might have been continued in role-playing games, I think, had been broken there and did not continue. We don't have a magazine, as I said before, that's kind of connecting. And 2020s, it's very hard to start a new tradition about this because the scene is very different. At the end of the 90s, people started purchasing dice, started purchasing books. So basically, the start of modern role-playing games was at that time. Up to that time, we had no players, we had no groups, we had no books. Had these stories about people trading dice because they ordered them online and not everybody had a credit card then, so people were kind of black marketing dice on the scene in Sofia, and it was interesting time. Now I sell hundreds of dice and people are buying dice. I always remember those times, kind of a rare commodity around here.
They're games that cater to different gaming styles. So here's Andrei again talking about the local scene and what games are available in Bulgaria.
We have three types of role-playing game people in Bulgaria. We have let's say, the person who is not that interested in the system, but rather they're interested in the social experience, right? So those people usually stick to Dungeons and Dragons, specifically 5th edition, because that really allows them to forget about the rules and be more social, be more role-playing oriented, be more puzzle oriented, and so on. Then you have the hardcore people that want to explore systems, and whenever they are playing Dungeons and Dragons, they're always making the most optimized characters, right? So those are the gamer people, I guess we can say. And then you have the warp scene, which I think is quite big in Bulgaria. There are mainly, I guess, because of the nature in Bulgaria, the warping scene is very well developed because you have all these interesting places and old, not really castles, but old buildings, old historical buildings that you can really set your warp around. Endival is one of the old school games that, from what I remember and what I understand about the history of Endival, it was the bridge for the Bulgarian citizens to get excited and interested in looking for foreign titles. Endival, of course, being done in a place where role-playing games are not that famous, or at least they weren't that famous when Endival was first made, has a little bit of the problems that because there were not enough people to understand the game, there are some things about it that are kind of weird and you're not going to see them in modern RPG games. For example, in Endival, you can upgrade your swimming skill to the point where you can swim in air, right? So this is something that is more common to systems that are in the younger years of developing an RPG scene or system. Other role-playing games in Bulgaria are, let me try to translate it, Adventure with Sword and Magic. That's a very famous one. Some call it the Bible for role-playing games in Bulgaria. That one is very mathematically oriented. The book is, I think, at least 600 pages or something like that. Also, there is Naonia Sviat on the other side. Recently, there is a game called Brave Chronicles, which I haven't played yet, but it's making some noise on the internet, so I really hope it's a good one and it gets more people involved in that scene.
I also got to talk to the author of one of the games Andrei mentioned.
Hi, my name's Emil. I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria. I guess my interest in RPGs arose when I was a kid, just playing video games. The first RPGs that I got started with were Baldur's Gate. I did play Fable and The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. And I got my first tabletop RPG book, which was the third edition of Endival, which is like a Bulgarian tabletop RPG, when I was 13 maybe. And at the time, I had no idea how it's played because what I'd gotten used to was playing video games. I never really got that you need a narrator from the book. Now, paging through it, I see that it is there. Like, they do tell you that you need a narrator, but it doesn't really go too much into detail about how to be a narrator. At the time, I thought it was just kind of like a tabletop game. So you get together with your friends and you come up with scenarios and you go through them. Now I know that that's not the case. But yeah, I got introduced to tabletop RPGs through Endival. And then later on in university, I met some people who were playing D&D 5e, and I started playing with them. I tried Warhammer, fantasy RPG. I also played Exalted, Vampire the Masquerade. And at some point, I decided to create my own RPG because, to be honest, ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to create a game. The main thing about Naonia Sviat, I would say, is it's a very bare bones kind of game. So it has a sturdy system. It has like combat maneuvers. It has like a rudimentary crafting system. It has a magic system, but with a twist. That's another reason that I wanted to create my own game, is that I never really felt entranced. I never really felt in a magical world when I was playing D&D. Magic was just everywhere. It's trivial in a way. Like, you're walking through town and there's fairies everywhere. There's kobolds, there's goblins and half-orcs and dragon people. And it never really felt magical to me. So I spent a lot of time thinking, how can I make it less trivial? So apart from the mechanics, which you can build upon. So Nonia Svet does have abilities, but you have to narrate them. Like, you have to create a story out of your ability and make it a part of your character. Otherwise, it's just not there. Like, for example, if you're a caster, there's a bunch of ways to cast magic, but you don't just throw a fireball. You have to gather some ingredients, go find an alchemist's lab, mix your ingredients, and then you have like an explosive elixir. You can't just summon fire out of your fingertips unless you're in the other world. So the other world is the character's imagination.
We did talk in more detail about Naonia Sviat, but because of the length, this will be a bonus episode. So, when I visited the Sofia book market some years ago, I actually got a hold of a copy of Endival. I could hardly read Bulgarian, but the layout of the book made it clear it was a role-playing game. So back then I thought there was only this one Bulgarian RPG.
Endival is, I think, like, if we have to place it somewhere on the narrativist, gamist, simulationist scale, it's probably the closest to the gamist scale, because it doesn't really have a lot of mechanics to steer the narrative. So it's not like Fate in that regard, or like another more narrative-driven game. It's not really simulationist either, because it's a very high fantasy game. The races you can play as are like a Gorgon, like the Gorgona Medusa from ancient Greek myth. You can play as a skeleton, which they call Naiski. They're like magic-powered skeletons. You can play as an elf. You can play as a dark elf, a werewolf-human hybrid, which, if I remember correctly, is a race that was created by either the werewolves or the people as like servants, like a servant race. There's also the Zdrachnici, which I guess translates as Twilighters. Let's just call them Twilight Elves. They're basically like artificially created race that was created by one of the gods to be the perfect race, but then they forgot one flaw, which is like they can't expose their kin to sun. There's people, and then you can also play like a hybrid. They call them mutts. You get your abilities. You have, I think, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 like main attributes. There's strength, endurance, agility, or like dexterity. There's also speed, knowledge, will, and Efirnos. It's basically your magical talent. They call it ether. You get your racial abilities. The game has some example names for each race. I thought that was pretty cool when I was a kid. And then you have a whole bunch of history here. There was the creation era, then there was the first war, and then there was a bunch of other events, and then we get to present day. One interesting thing about this setting is that the most powerful group in society is the Union of Alchemists, which is called the Agilia. That's the name of the guild, like the Alchemist Guild. They have a lot of different circles within the guild, and the most secretive of them all is in charge of this. It's kind of like a virtual reality created through magic, and you can interact with that throughout the game. Like, it's basically like creating your own pocket dimension or something like that. Like, you can hide stuff in there or use it as like an arcane sanctuary of sorts. There's a lot of abilities which are like fighter abilities. Then there's also guild abilities for rogues. There's a bunch of classes as well. So like the classes in Endival are the alchemist, the warrior, the cleric, the adventurer, which is like the rogue, and the mage. And then there's also they're called palms, like the palm of your hand, and they're like a custom class of sorts where you can just mix and match whatever you want. The combat system is a little too detailed for my taste. Like, you get a couple of different types of damage, you get a couple of different types of defense. So now that I've played a couple of games, I know that that's really not that difficult to keep track of. But back in the day when I was going through this at first, I was thinking, man, you have to like check if you're getting like piercing damage or blunt damage. There's like the three types of damage are your standard piercing, slashing, and blunt damage. And also like the defense is the same. There's a lot of gods in Endival, and the gods are kind of like in D&D. They do interfere with the world. There's a lot of them, and each one is the patron of a particular aspect of creation, and they cover pretty much everything from, the elements to dreams, or like classes of society. There's the god of commerce, and there's the god of thieves, and so on. There's like a semi-extensive list of items you can own. There's all sorts of poisons, and also there are rules for playing in Isal, Isal is the magical virtual reality that alchemists create. There's also an adventure at the end of the book. It's not very detailed. Also, like, they don't go into a lot of detail about actually leading the adventure or like directions in which it could go. But there you go. That's Endival. So it was created by a team of friends, and like the leading figure, I would say, is Božidar Grozdanov, also known as Bave. As far as I know, Bave's dad had a printing house, and also at the time, Bave was a student in Sofia University. And Sofia University, apparently, used to have Lord of the Rings fan club. And people would gather there to talk about, Tolkien's work and Lord of the Rings. And at some point, I guess some of them got a hold of a copy of Dungeons and Dragons, and they decided to create their own game like that, because it was practically unheard of at the time. Like the entire genre was just foreign in Bulgaria. It was not foreign, it was alien. So they decided to create their own game, and they talked about it a lot in the fan club. So it picked up momentum, and by the time it was actually finished and published, there was a lot of people were waiting to pick it up.
Here is Stefan again talking about what games he has in stock.
I have Endival, I have Приключения с Мечем Magia, which is the sword and sorcery one. I have No One is Svet. Endival is very interesting example as the first thing that is RPG system in Bulgaria, because it's it's a bit of outsider art, I think. I already talked about this period. It was not much. We didn't have RPGs. Several of us had some English RPGs, and people knew things about RPGs, but had no tradition in playing them and had no experience in playing them. So the authors of Endival created something very, very special, but in places in that book, it's very hard to find out how you actually should play this thing. And some of those people are my friends, and they are very successful game designers now. Mechan Magia started in a magazine that was kind of short-lived, a fantasy magazine that had this column. It was called Mechan Magia, but that's after Endival. And later, this thing, Mechan Magia, got published outside of the magazine as a separate game that's called Axiom 16.
The Bulgarian RPG scene is evolving, which is encouraging to me. Evtim gives an outlook of the current development.
It's practically impossible to go to any sort of RPG event nowadays without running into people going, would you like to test our new game? Or would you like to test our new system? Or we're doing this particular thing and we haven't released somewhere then.
I also asked him about specific Bulgarian elements in games.
One had cards and used that to basically control everything, and you had a deck with your actions. They're all really original ideas, but I think the one main thing that I noticed about all of them is that all of them have Baba Yaga or I don't know, our version of vampires, the Bulgarian one, and it's just kind of focused on these different mythological creatures that we want to see and kind of kill. And one thing that I find really funny is this, since you mentioned that in Germany horror games are popular, in Bulgaria, like there's this thing where when we see our own mythology in games, we usually just like, even if it's supposed to be scary or kill, we just enjoy it because it's kind of funny, because our mythology is a bit silly from like a modern perspective, like kind of really silly. Our vampires are these flying skin bags with, like, I don't know, a beak kind of thing, a needle for a mouth, and that's how they suck your blood, and they just float away. Some descriptions I think were even like these leather pouches for water, like water skins, but just huge and flying, and that's our vampire. So if you see that in a game trying to kill you, you kind of just, I don't know, you laugh and you say that your character takes out a sword and pokes it, and it kind of pops, and then it's funny. I don't know. I think that's a charm of these new ones, that because, well, the systems themselves are usually underwork, as I said, because you go there to actually try out the system, see how the mechanics handle and stuff like that. But the flavor bit that's added on top, when it clashes with the system, it's really funny. I kind of really enjoy that.
Bulgaria is a relatively small country where access to RPGs was difficult at first. Choose Your Own Adventure books are a big market though. There are a number of game shops, original Bulgarian RPGs, and actual plays in Bulgarian. We can definitely see the development of a lively gaming scene, and it will be fascinating to follow up in the near future. So thank you for listening to the World of RPGs. A special thanks goes out to the Bulgarian gamers who talked to me, Evtim, Stefan, Emil and Andrei. The intro music was Battle of the Dragons by Thomas Mutsiu. Subscribe to this channel and get ready for episode 2. We again end this episode with a teaser. It's an excerpt of an actual play from the country we'll be covering next. Maybe you can guess which language this is.
To make the budget šta su misli? Pit, šta, party, hoće neko pjevat, ti znaš pjevat.
Ja znam pjevati.
On može pjevat, mi možemo plesati, pit, šta ste vi planirali?
Ali ne
A
znam.
mogu ti ja pokazati ples svog
Nema
naroda?
baš
Stigli smo do zida, jel?
Ples svog naroda. Da.
Kako se zove ono zid?
Maltura.
Malturas!
Zašto su bići? Spavam.
Bog Malturas!
Dobila sam prijatelje da ih upoznaš.
Ko je to?
Iris,
Ja Igra Kora!
dobila sam ti novog stanara u zidu.
A, ti od Tilibalda, da. Šta treba?
Trebamo preći prek zida, trebamo doći do Zigurata za Tilibalda nešto.
Pa dobro, pređite.
A, super onda. Ajmo! Told you I got a friend.
Tako lako.
Ali, prosti, Krundar, ti znaš gdje je Zigurat?
Ne, i zašto mi pričamo
Ti
sa...
znaš gdje je Zigurat?
Jel ti znaš gdje je Zigurat?
Šta znam, nekih 3-4 sata odavde u nekom smjeru.
Kojem
Ceca smjeru?
Okej, je...
Ovako ću ti reći, ja sam ti zid koji ide u krug, veliki jedan radijus, ja sam jedan veliki radijus. Ja sam radijus. Jel me razumiješ?
Razumijem te.
Ja sam zid, ja ne vidim, ja ne mogu...
Ali ima neko koji živi ovdje negdje blizu u tebi da bi znao.
Ardon!
I vidiš da, to jest ne vidiš, ali čuješ iz magle negdje sa zida, Da, tu sam i ja. Ne znam gdje je Zigurat, ali hvala što ste me spasili.
Jel bi hoćeš s nama ići na avanturu pa te vratimo nazad ovdje?
Da, hoćeš samo na avanturu.
Koliko je opasna ta avantura?
Ma neš, idemo do Zigurata.
Nimalo opasna.
Kakvog
Sasvim sigurno.
Zigurata?
Tako niko ne zna za Zigurata.
A kako mi znamo za Zigurat?